Let's repeat this exercise, assuming these two assets actually have a different correlation. What if instead of a 30% positive correlation coefficient, so that level of diversification, these two assets actually have a negative 30% correlation coefficient. So even more diversification, so much so that the correlation is negative. Negative correlations are rare in actual assets, but this will be useful for illustrative purposes. And so the first thing we need to do is calculate a new W1, and we can see down here on this graph that where I have a 30% correlation coefficient, I have this black opportunity set, and I have to decide where I want to be on this, and you can see that the minimum is somewhere to the left of 12. But here, with even greater diversification, I can actually achieve significantly lower risk. My minimum is somewhere over here closer to 8. And so when I calculated the W1, when I calculated where I wanted to be on this curve to achieve the optimal sloped CAL for the assets with 30% correlation, I had around a 60-40 portfolio. I had 60% of my money in asset 1 and only 40% in asset 2. But now I'm going to have 43% of my money in asset 1 and 57% of my money in asset 2. And we can see on this vertical scale here, I'm roughly 60% of the way up to asset 1, and here I'm only 43% of the way up to asset 1, with the remaining in asset 2. So I recalculate the expected return of the portfolio using my new W1 star, and the reason I have a new W1 star is because I've assumed a different correlation. And so I get an expected return of my optimal risky portfolio not at 11%, but instead down here at 9.29%. And the risk of my optimal risky portfolio, instead of being out here at 14%, is instead here at only 10.18%. And now the slope of my CAL, my capital allocation line, and remember I'm on a different allocation set between my risky assets. I have a different risky asset efficient frontier, but I can see that if I were here, I would have a lower sloped CAL, and if I were here, I would have a lower sloped CAL. This is the spot which is tangent to the capital allocation line and produces the steepest sloped CAL, and because I have more diversification, I can actually achieve a greater Sharpe ratio, a greater risk-return trade-off. Remember, the slope of the CAL is going to be the expected return of the risky portfolio minus the risk-free, divided by the risk of the risky portfolio, and I get a steeper sloped CAL.